May 2025 was a very good month. I finished 6 books, and for the most part, I enjoyed all of them. I read about 33% of John Steinbeck's East of Eden. This is a masterpiece. If the quality is maintained for the rest of the story, this will definitely be amongst my top 5 favorite books of all time. So I'm very optimistic about that. I returned to the ring for the first time in a year and a half. I won my fight, the bills are paid, I'm no longer consumed with so much stress and anxiety and fear about the future. So I'm sitting easy. I'm quite happy, and I'm excited to dive into more literary journeys in the month of June. But before we get into June, let's talk about how the reads went for the month of May. It was a mixed bag, 6 books, a lot of them on the shorter end of the scale, but for the most part, I liked them. Let's talk about it. The first book I finished in May was A Fig for All the Devils by CS Fritz. I wasn't sure what to expect of this book. There's not a lot of reviews for it on Amazon. I've heard no one else talk about this book except for Ian Gubelli, who mentioned it on a video about 6 weeks ago, thereabouts. And he was talking about how no other book has been on his TBR for longer than A Fig for All the Devils. So I thought I'd give it a try. I thought the premise was interesting. I thought it was promising. I love the idea of death personified, death incarnate, taking on an apprentice, teaching a younger person the ropes about how to be a fair harbinger of death. I love Grim Reaper characters. I loved The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy growing up. I loved Mort by Terry Pratchett. I love death personified. It's cool. And when these stories are pulled off well, they're very philosophical, they're very thought-provoking, they're very moving. And A Fig for All the Devils was none of those things. This book was really trying to be, a dark comedy, but the humor, for me at least, was a complete miss. A lot of the scenes that were supposed to be funny and over the top, I found just very obnoxious, very not funny. And a lot of the characters in this book are so stupid and short-sighted, so comically, incompetent, that I wasn't rooting for anybody in this book. All the people, all the characters are annoying, they're not likable, and I found the plot to be there was no surprises. There was no plot twist. You could guess every beat of the story, and the ending, the conclusion, the climax was very underwhelming, very rushed, and I don't think it fit with the overall theme of the story. There was one reveal where I was thinking to myself, that's pretty interesting, but they don't talk about that very much. And the conclusion of this book was very uncathartic. CS Fritz, I love the premise. I love the ideas. I felt like the execution was lacking. So maybe, Ian, if you're thinking about still reading this book, maybe skip this one. I think it's a little, not very great. Next, I read Elrich of Melinn by Michael Moorcock, the first installment chronologically, not in publishing order, of his Elric saga, which is just one small piece of Michael Moorcock's massive mega series known as The Eternal Champion, a series that spans different multiverses, timelines, many heroes, different protagonists, what have you. He really was a pioneer of the multiverse type of stories that we see that are a lot more prevalent in fantasy today. Michael Moorcock, his reach and his influence over the fantasy genre cannot be overstated. It basically goes Tolkien, Michael Moorcock. No one has had more influence over the genre than those two. That being said, there's not a lot of people reading Michael Moorcock on BookTube. There are some people in the corners of BookTube who talk about, Elric and the other, like Von Beck, the other Eternal Champions, but those channels are very rare. You're seeing a lot more booktubers starting to jump into the Eternal Champion, and that's very exciting, and I'm hoping to be a part of this wave of attention that's going to be put on Michael Moorcock's works. And does this book hold up? Yes, it does. Elric of Melinn was a delight. I love the story. I love Elric as a protagonist. He's very interesting and brooding and introspective and whiny and philosophical, and not at all what I was thinking. Like most protagonists from this time period of fantasy, I'm thinking like people that are like influenced by Conan the Barbarian. I'm thinking like the muscular barbarian guy who saves the princess, kills dragons by himself, defeats dark wizards. I was expecting this story to be a lot more generic than it was. And it wasn't. It was very original. I think if this book was written in 2025, it would still stick out. It would still be something unique. The feel of this story is unlike anything else I've ever really read. Michael Moorcock does not bog the reader down in exposition, no info dumps. He just says, oh yeah, and this is this god, and then he moves on. Doesn't explain anything. And there's something refreshing about that. So many authors in the present day, they're clearly obsessed with their world building. They want the reader to know absolutely everything about their world. And sometimes I love that, but sometimes it messes with the pacing and the rhythm of the story. But Michael Moorcock, every part of Elric of Melinn was a joy to read. I look forward to tackling more of the Elric saga. Perhaps even after I finish the Elric saga, I will tackle the rest of his massive Eternal Champion mega series. But yeah, this book was a delight. More people should be reading the Elric saga. I look forward to this series kind of catching more attention over the next few years here on BookTube. I think it's going to be a lot bigger than it already is. The next book I read was The Serviceberry by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She is best known for her work braiding sweetgrass. I have not read that, but I've heard a lot of good things. I thought I'd tackle her shorter work, The Serviceberry, first before tackling braiding sweetgrass. And this book was very short, but it was very thought-provoking, and it packed a real punch. The Serviceberry is a critique of our consumerist capitalist culture. So clearly, there is some overt political undertones to this book. So if that's not your cup of tea, avoid this. But if you're able to look past that, and you find the concepts and ideas of gift economies engaging and intriguing, definitely pick up The Serviceberry. It's a very optimistic view of how our economy might change to better suit us little people on the communal and like small scale level. And she uses examples from history, from indigenous cultures and societies across the world, whether they be indigenous tribes in Africa, the Aborigines in Australia, or, you know, the American Indians, certain tribes of the American Indians. It was very eye-opening. And I'm not an anarchist or a communist or someone that, you know, has ever taken communalism very seriously. But this book is quite compelling and it's quite persuasive, and I enjoyed it. And when I read a nonfiction book, I usually don't read things that I know I'm naturally just going to be aligned with because I don't feel like that helps me grow. But I was pleasantly surprised, and my point of view has been altered slightly, and that's all you could ask for a work of nonfiction of this type. Moving on to classic science fiction, we have For a Breath I Tarry by Roger Zelazny. This novella, it's very short, was very ahead of its time. It was written so well. It follows a machine who becomes obsessed with human culture and is trying to become human. This is a story we've seen told many, many, many times in science fiction. And this story is quite old, several decades old. But I feel like Roger Zelazny still had a lot to say for the modern reader of 2025. The ideas of what makes us human, what is personhood, what has a soul, what does being human mean? Why should we even, why do we matter in the grand scheme of things? Roger Zelazny tackles all of these things in a way that's very thought-provoking, in a way where he doesn't tell the reader what to think, but merely exposes the questions that we should be thinking and pondering about. And that's good science fiction. Science fiction's supposed to make you think as well as entertain you. And For a Breath I Tarry was beautifully written. And Roger Zelazny, there's a reason why a lot of people talk about him with such high regard. They speak so highly of him. This is my first Zelazny, and I will definitely be reading more of his works in the future. One of my favorite reads in 2024 was The Six Deaths of the Saint by Alix E. Harrow. It was 30 pages. It was a masterpiece from the gutters to godhood and back. In less than 30 pages, all the emotions, beautifully written, very succinct, very cathartic, and it's probably my favorite short story of all time. So I picked up another Alix E. Harrow work in May, The Night in the Butcherbird, and this was compelling. It takes place in a post-apocalyptic future where, humankind's disappearing, and we seem to be plagued by a disease that we're not sure how it works, but it turns humans into monsters. It turns them into mutants, into monstrous creatures that could change their appearance, and they're seemingly mindless, and they're terrifying. Is it a plague from God? Is it science? Is it abomination? Is it demons? We don't know. The Knight and the Butcherbird tells the story of a young woman who has fallen in love with somebody who has become a monster. And a knight comes to town whose job it is to hunt down this monster. And the woman, she has conflicting emotions about whether or not she should help this knight hunt down her loved one. The story immediately puts its hooks in you, and I found the plot and premise so compelling. I loved the way tension built as the story progressed. I loved the conclusion and climax. I loved the falling action. If everything Alix E. Harrow writes has these thoughtful, bittersweet endings, I will read a lot more of her works. Because I've read 2 of her short story, novelette length stories, and they're both really, really good. I love The Knight and the Butcherbird. I love the twists and turns. I love the reveals. I love the dynamic between our main character and the knight. And I love the conflicting feelings our main character has as she thinks about and considers hunting down her former loved one who's become a monster. Very interesting stuff. And finally, the most confusing, the most difficult book I've read in many years, Treacle by Alan Garner. This book is very Welsh. I am not Welsh. I'm not sure if it's clear from my accent. I'm not from that part of the world. I had heard very conflicting things about Treacle. It was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, and I was prepared to think deeply. That being said, I was thinking very deeply while reading this book, and upon completion, I had no idea what happened. I have never had to read a book in my life where upon completion, I was typing into Reddit, what does this book mean? What did I read? And then I had a person who's more familiar of Welsh folklore and Welsh mythology explain to me a lot of the symbolism, and everything clicked. And then this story was really dang good. This story was very good once I understood the symbolism and a lot of the things that Alan Garner was referencing and alluding to. It was a very beautiful story, not very accessible. A lot of the language is very archaic. I was Googling words every 3 or 4 pages and several words. Treacle, the wizard, the Gandalf character of the story, he uses a lot of very archaic words. And I thought I was very well versed in archaic English. I grew up reading the old King James version of the Bible. I thought I was prepared for Old English. I was not prepared for Old English archaic words mixed with Welsh slang. It was very difficult. It was a very rewarding read after I Googled what it all meant, but it was very confusing. And I did find the conclusion to be a little underwhelming, but this is amongst the most whimsical things I've ever read. I love the playful writing style. I loved Alan Garner's playful prose. I love the dialogue. And after I got more familiar with the Welsh slang, I found it very funny and comedic. But yeah, it's always an interesting experience when you read something and you have no idea what you just consumed. But Treacle is definitely a book that grows better as more time passes, as I ponder more and more about the things that happened. But this is not a book you want to take breaks while reading. Try to rush through this book. Google the words, look up what you don't understand. There's a lot of Welsh things, a lot of old words that are archaic, but it's very rewarding. I don't regret it. I was confused, and this book helped me grow, and I could see why a lot of the reactions and reviews of this book are mixed. It was beautiful and whimsical, but complicated and difficult to understand. But I think Alan Garner was going for that, so bravo. In conclusion, what is my book of the month for May 2025? I am tempted to say The Knight and the Butcherbird by Alix E. Harrow because it was a great short story. Only about 40 to 50 pages, but it was amazing, monumental. But I think it's too short to qualify as my book of the month. So I think I'm going to go with Elrich of Melnibone by Michael Moorcock. I love Elric as a protagonist. I found him so relatable and compelling and dramatic and entertaining. I found the pacing of this novel to be great, perfectly paced. It was very exciting, never dragged, and I finished it excited and motivated to tackle the next installment in a series. And a lot of us booktubers have this problem. We start a series, we like the first installment, and then we never continue on because starting series feels so much better than tackling the middle books in a series. Because it's a lot of work to finish a series, so it's easier just to start another series and tell ourselves that we'll get to this series eventually. But I'm not going to procrastinate continuing on with Elric. The first installment was great. It ended off on a cliffhanger that I need to see how it turns out. And it's compelling, it's going to engage me, and I have very high hopes for the Elric saga. And I have very high hopes for the rest of 2025. May was really good, but I'm glad it's in the rearview mirror. June's going to be a great month. I have some good videos planned. I think I have like 4 or 5 long-form videos scripted out that I'm going to film very soon. So I think the first half of 2025 was great, but the second half is when things really get going. That's when I'm speaking into existence. That's what I'm hopeful for. That's why I'm optimistic. I look forward to seeing what the stories have in store for me. And I'll talk to you guys next time.